Okay, we are going to talk about this database question. It's a question that I've given to my students, and we're discussing about it because most of them had difficulties answering the questions. So we'll begin by trying to understand the question first in this video, and then we'll continue the next video on looking at what are the questions that are being posed and how we can answer them. So I think the first important thing is to understand the context of the question that's been given to us, and so we need to read it. We start off with reading it. There are many closely related canis species in North America, including gray wolf, eastern wolf, and western coyote. Now, if you notice, the gray wolf, eastern wolf, and western coyote are the common names, and they have given you the species name, which is C. lupus, C. lacaune, and C. latrans. And they say that hybridization can occur between members of these species. So, as a student, if you have been learning about species, you know that the definition states that they cannot interbreed, because a species by definition can only interbreed among themselves. But in this case, they put there that they can interbreed. And so perhaps students may find some difficulty in understanding this, or they may get confused. And in a way, students may have not thought of if there was a possibility that they could that species could interbreed. But then this means that you have to draw from your knowledge of your understanding on speciation and natural selection. If you understand that many species that exist today actually originate from one original species. So that would mean that at a certain point in time, there was some possibility of species being able to interbreed. Now, then let's move on to the next paragraph. So, for example, during the last 100 years, hybridization has occurred between the western coyotes and the eastern wolves in the area of Ontario, shown by the star in the map shown below. So if we look at the map below, you will see a star there, and they say that this is where hybridization between the eastern wolves and the western coyotes occurred. And this is just an example that they are giving. Please remember, this is an example, which means that they are not listing for you all the hybridizations that can occur. So as an example, they're just telling you that this happened between the western coyotes and the eastern wolves. So which means that there are other hybridizations that occurred, and this should be at the back of your mind and when you read these things. The next paragraph is genetic evidence for hybridization. So what are they talking about here? It looks like they are looking for evidence that hybridization did occur. From their own information, they realize that, or from whatever information they have, they only know that western coyotes and eastern wolves did hybridize. And we gave you the example. And in order to know whether other kinds of hybridization happen between these three species, we need to look for the evidence. So the evidence for hybridization is a genetic evidence, and it is based on identifying the haplotypes. What are these haplotypes? As a student, if you're going to read this, you suddenly realize, oh my God, what is this word? Perhaps you've never come across it. Perhaps your teachers never mentioned it, and you're just so caught unaware. And this can make you very nervous. And as a student, you would definitely start to feel your confidence going down, and your ability to understand and grasp somehow has become less. You somehow have a block in your mind. But from a teacher's point of view, this is totally normal, because you have to understand that in an exam, examiners like to put questions that introduce you to new contexts, new situations. What they want to see from you is how you can apply your knowledge to such new contexts. So in this case, the context is haplotypes, and they explain very briefly that it is actually a combination of linked alleles in clusters of similar genes. So if you do not understand this sentence, what you could at least understand is that these are alleles, which you've learned before, and these are actually genes. And you just take it from there, alleles and genes. So haplotypes actually represents alleles or genes, and that exist in the mitochondrial DNA. And you should know what is mitochondria. You should know that every mitochondria has a DNA that has been taught before. And these are mitochondrial DNA that came from canis populations. Now notice that it says canis populations, so it doesn't refer to a single species. Okay, it's talking about canis populations. And if you look at the next sentence, the populations in this study were Minnesota northwestern wolf, southern Ontario coyote, and northeastern coyote. Now, as a student, you would definitely be wondering, how am I going to connect what is this tree that's mentioned up here, and then now there's another tree that's mentioned here? I'm very confused. What is happening? I don't understand what is happening. Because here they mention the grey wolf, eastern wolf, and western coyote, and here they mention Minnesota northwestern wolf, southern Ontario coyote, and northeastern coyote. So this kind of makes you really confused. But you need to read the sentence carefully. It says the populations in this study. Populations refer to all those that carry the genus name Canis. Okay, so please remember the first scientific name, Canis, is actually the genus name. So all of them are a Canis population. So it can be wolf or it can be coyotes. So in this case, these populations in this area, Minnesota. So they have mentioned an area, Minnesota northwestern wolves. And then there is southern Ontario coyotes. These are in areas, Minnesota and Ontario. But the last one states northeastern coyote in general. So they did not state a particular state, just like they did with Minnesota and Ontario. Now if you look up here, you can see that this one states grey wolf, which is common name for one particular species. You see here C. lupus. And this one, eastern wolf, refers to one particular species. Western coyote refers to one particular species. Whereas these do not, the ones at the bottom here, do not refer to particular species. Instead, they refer to populations of 3 different areas. So this is where I believe most students get confused. They see that these 3 are introduced, and then suddenly another 3 new names that are being introduced, thinking that they could be species, but they are not. This refers to the area. So now, the thing is, the next sentence, assume that all animals in each Canis population have the same mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. Okay, so the same mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. It just means that they all have generally similar sets of DNA. But it's not important if you do not know what it means. Doesn't matter, okay? It just means that they are taking mitochondrial DNA from all of these Canis populations. So, as a summary, right, we need to make sure we understand what is being stated in this particular paragraph. And in order to understand it better, let's move down. If you look here, you will see that it states here mitochondrial DNA haplotype and haplotype origin. Now, this is where you suddenly realize, or I rather suddenly realize, that actually the grey wolf, eastern wolf, and western coyote are specific species that used to exist about 100 years ago, because it says there in the top here, for example, during the last 100 years, hybridization occurred between these 2 species. But I believe that's what it means by that, the fact that 3 of them actually hybridized in the last 100 years. So that means we are looking at origin species, which is not stated in this sentence, and therefore you were confused, why did they talk about this? But the fact that they put here, for example, during the last 100 years, actually could have told us that, yeah, these are the origin species. And so in the origin species, they carry mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. So the type C22 is found in grey wolf. C1, C3, C13 is found in eastern wolf. C9, C19 is found in the western coyote. Now, if grey wolf did not interbreed, then all of the subsequent species that came out of grey wolf would only contain C22 and would not contain the other DNA haplotypes. And same with eastern wolf, if they did not interbreed, then they will only contain C1, C3, and C13. However, they did say that there was interbreeding. If there was interbreeding that occurred, then the species that came after these three species would contain a mixture of some from probably C22, some probably had C3 mixed up. And there would be a mixture probably of those from of some DNA haplotype from eastern wolf and western coyote. So if we look at these three areas, for example, Minnesota northwestern wolves, what they did was they took probably maybe 100 wolves, and then they analyzed the mitochondrial DNA from these wolves, and they found out that there was C13 at this amount of percentage. They found there was C3 at this amount of percentage, and they found C22 at this amount of percentage. This tells them that the populations in this area actually contain C13 and C3, which was previously from the eastern wolf, and C22 previously from the grey wolf. That is evidence that the grey wolf and eastern wolf did hybridize. And that is the evidence. The next evidence we see is on these two areas. We see here C19, C9, and C1. Again, C19, C9, C1. These two looks like they have the same DNA haplotypes. But where did they come from? So C19 and C9 came from western coyote, and C1 came from eastern wolf. So this means that eastern wolf and western coyote did hybridize, and that is the evidence as well. So if we mention this, in the next question, it says outline the genetic evidence that Canis populations have hybridized. If we mention this and this as evidence that they have hybridized, you would have got 2 marks already. Okay, so I assume this has 2 marks. Let's just go up. Usually, yeah, it's 2 marks. So 2 marks for the first question would have been answered. And that's for the first question. So we will continue in the next video on the second question. But I hope that you now understand by looking at this, you understand that there is a difference between the mention of the specific origin species, now that we know it is origin because of this, and the different areas. Okay, just to make it a little bit clearer, so this means that in this area there could be many types of species of wolves. In this area there could be many species of coyotes, and here many species of coyotes. So they probably just took 100 here and 100 here, and then analyzed for their mitochondrial DNA haplotypes. Okay. And one more thing that is very important to state here is that you now realize how difficult it can be to understand a database question, and how important it is for you to look at the words in detail. You really have to read and think about what is being written. You can't just read and browse through and quickly answer the questions. You have to take your time to look and read and understand. And if you're worried about time and you're trying to rush through, there is a very high chance that you may get it wrong. You will have lots of misconceptions. There are so many possibility of assuming certain things. So just be very careful when you are doing database questions.